Welcome to Flanders Game TCG, your home for One Piece content. In this deck list video, we've got Rosinate, the green-blue OP05 leader, who has the ability of being a blocker, and end of turn, if you have 6 or less cards in hand, you can set the leader as active. Don't forget to like and subscribe to get more videos. First up in the deck list, we've got the Alt Art leader. Gotta have that little bling, as we're loving this leader at the moment. And then we've got 4 Scratchman Apu. So we've got 4 of these for the particular reason that it is a 2K and a Supernova. We do have the ability to rest the opponent's character of cost of 2 or less, which might be a small blocker, but for the most part we just search for it for being a 2K. We then have the STO2 version of this, which is in the similar vein, though I have occasionally played it to act as a threat to rest an opponent's Don, especially with a lot of Don being left up at the moment. Then we've got 2 Tashigi. These are to help with some of the removal, especially in blue, and will be played by the kid that you'll see later on, but also it is just a 2K as we'll be running 10 in this deck. We're not too worried about 2Ks being at 10 because we do round up a lot of blockers, which you'll be seeing. Then we've got 4 Kid Killer. These allow us to look at the top 5 cards of the deck and look for a Supernova. And also, more importantly, you have the on an opponent's attack. You can trash it to set one as active, which is nice for some of the 1-cost events we have for countering. Then we run 4 Sugar in the deck. This is really important as on your opponent's turn, you'll be able to arrest any character one character when they play a character, and on play you can rest 4 or less. This is really nice on your second turn to rest something in opponents and swing into it, and using the leader to block to save the sugar. We then have 4 Rosinates. These are obviously our protection in the deck and also protect our life, and are especially good when we have some of our rested characters and protecting them from either battle or being KO'd. I then run 2 Capone Beiges. These are really useful for cycling through our deck. If you have 6 or more rested cards, draw 1 card, trash 1 card. This also includes characters and your leader, so you don't necessarily just have to be using it with Don. And it's also just a nice blocker if we're playing against an aggressive deck like Yamato. Then as a highlight of deck, we've got 4 VVs. So these, if your leader is multicolored and you have 5 or less cards, you can draw 2 cards. The aim of this deck is to mainly play this a lot and keep bouncing it back to hand and play it again so we never run out. And it means that we can trash our counter to protect our characters. Then I run 2 Pudding. There's so many decks right now that end up having so many cards in hand, so it's just nice to strip them back, especially stuff like Kuzan, which is doing quite well at the moment, or decks like Rayleigh or UP Luffy, which also gain a lot of cards in hand. Then we next have is 3 of the OP01 Trafalgar Law. So this is a blocker that on play you can return a card to your character to your hand and then play a card of 3 costs or less. So this is really nice as it allows us to play the VV and bounce that back and forth to hand, or also the Kid Killers. So we can kind of search for exactly what we want, if it's Supernova related, or if it's just drawing related, we try to play those VVs. Then I run 4 Carrots. This is kind of our defense of the deck and allows us to, on play and when attacking, freeze a cost of 7 or less character. This is honestly one of the highlights of the deck, and we really want to be using VV to make sure we draw it or a mulligan. And then we also run 2 Jewelry Bonnie, which kind of play as like our pseudo carrot, which only on play allow us to rest a character or a Don card. I do find the Don card quite useful against some like yellow decks that are going to play something on 8 or 10, so you can kind of rest one of those to stop it. Or even like Shanks decks playing resting a Don so they can't play 10 cost or something. Going into the high end, we've got 2 Dracula Mihawk. The main reason we play this is it allows us to set Don as active, and it allows us to play an 8 cost and a 5 cost, as we do run quite a few 5 costs as you've seen in this deck. If it wasn't for the fact we're running 5 costs, I'd probably lean more into the Kid, which comes up next. But we're running just 2, just to obviously balance it out. Then we also run, as I mentioned, 2 Kid. This has if 1 Donna underneath it, your opponent has to attack it rather than anything else, and it can activate main rest the character to play a 3 cost or less. So this allows us to play one of our cheap blockers or some draw, So it has quite a lot of versatility. And also we can block with our leader when they try to attack Kid to kind of gain it an extra life, basically. Then I also play 2 Monkey D. Luffys. This potentially is used, or this is used in general just to rush down our opponents, add an extra attack if sometimes we're lacking. Or it allows us to bounce something back to hand. So being an 8 cost, we could also bounce Kid Killer back to hand and play that afterwards to allow us to draw, and then potentially still trash it to use a 1 cost event or anything. An example of something that could be replaced with is Hody Jones. I have played around with it, but I wanted to lean more into the bouncing cards back into hand mechanic, so I've gone with Monkey D. Luffy. Finally, for our high cost characters, we run 2 Lore Beppos. This is to deal with any pesky big bodies that we can't freeze or deal with, or just to basically give us an extra 2k to our leader to survive us an extra turn, especially if we're facing a lot of smaller bodies. It's quite nice being up to that 7k. And lastly, as I mentioned, a lot of these 1 cost counters, we run 3 Dead Man's Game. Obviously allows us to help finish game if people spawn a whole bunch of blockers, or allows us to block and defend and not have to take a life. Next up, we've got the Rosinate starting hand guide. So if you haven't seen this before, I'll just do a quick run through. At the very bottom, we've got what is considered our top and best hands. This is obviously determined on the matchup, but generically this is what you'd be looking for. And then we've got second being a substitute for first, and third being, for the most part, you'd be mulliganing it. Ideally, I've always liked to have at least 1 2k in hand, just for those pesky early attacks, especially against something like a 6k leader. So ideally, I put Tashiki in this. I know we only run it at 2, but it's mainly just because of the fact that we have to draw into it if we are looking for it, where the Scratchmans we can both search via Kid Killer. It also allows us to have a little bit of protection and can be played out with kids, so it's quite nice to have that combination. If not though, we're more than happy just to throw it away, especially as I feel like we're seeing a lot less KOing happen in general in the meta, or in removal in general. Next up, obviously, we've got the Scratchman Oppose. I've mainly put the STO2 one, STO2 above above/below the more recent one, and that's mainly because of the fact that I find that the Resting Don actually becomes a bit more of a threat, and playing this on turn 2 can warrant some early removal from your opponent, which you can then say they've kind of wasted on, so you can save your VVs and carrots and stuff like that later on. Next up, we've got the early game / draw. So in this, at the bottom, we've got VV and Sugar. Sugar is always really nice with Rosinate, as it allows us to rest potentially whatever our opponent is playing first off on their first or second turn, and then swing into it using Rosinate. Or we like having VV because it allows us to basically either draw and keep recycling using stuff like Lore, or draw into the Sugar that we might have potentially missed. Another next step, we have got Kid Killer. I've got this in second because of the fact that we've got 4 of it and it can search itself, so it's not necessarily a be all end all if we don't see it at the start. We'll potentially be drawing into it, or once we find one, we'll be able to play it to search for itself. And then lastly, we've got Capone and Rosinate. I've put these at the very top just because they're a blocker. They're only really needed when we want to see those, when we're facing those early aggressive matchups. We probably ideally want to see them in the start. Otherwise, apart from that, we kind of want to be saving them for later in the game to protect our bigger bodies, such as our kids, our Luffys, and our carrots. Speaking of, we'll go into mid-control. We ideally want to be seeing at least one of these cards, because obviously as we progress through the turns, we want to be playing ideally one of our top cards for each of the turns. So for our third or fourth turn, we ideally want to be seeing Carrot, Lore, or Bonnie. So for Carrot, we want to see Carrot because of the fact that it allows us to rest anything. Potentially if anything swung into us already, we're going to freeze it, and basically from there constantly keep freezing it throughout the turns, or we'll freeze something else and swing into the other one depending what it is. Key things I love freezing are a Kuma after its first initial turn where it's got that +2. It's nice to just constantly freeze that. And a Shanks matchup, Lucky Roo is always nice to freeze. Or if they don't use their Going Merry, it's nice to be able to freeze a Sanji Pudding for the Great Luffy. Next we've got the Law. Law is really nice, especially if we've got a VV or a Kid Killer. Because from there we'll be able to either have played it the turn before and then play it again, or potentially bounce something else back in, like a 2k that we've put down early, such like the Scratchman. Finally, we've got Bonnie. This is, as I've mentioned before, just kind of like a substitute for not having 6 carrots in the deck, because you can't. So we just have 2 of those. They're kind of just a nice replacement in the hopes if we don't see that carrot. So then we've got the late game and rush, and this is definitely matchup dependent and depending on how the game is going. So most of the time we're going to be playing a little bit defensively, so we want to be seeing the Mihawk or the Kid, and the idea being is that we'll be able to play these and defend from there, potentially also protecting our carrots and sugars which are already on the board, while also playing something else out. Otherwise, we'd like to see Luffy or Law. These kind of help us stall / also be a little bit more aggressive. Law by bumping us up to 7, so that's a 7k swing coming through, or Luffy just bouncing back like a blocker or one of our own draw cards like VV or Kid Killer while getting another punch in. Finally, it's nice always seeing one of these 2 tech cards, especially depending on the matchup. If not, we can just see more of the other cards, but that is Pudding and Dead Man's Game. Dead Man's Game is always really nice to have at least one of, I've found, potentially needing to rest those blockers that come out in the late game to win a game, or potentially saving ourselves from a big attack that's come through as we're blocking to protect a carrot or protect our sugar. Next on the list, I've got a potential sideboard cards that we could be playing. These are cards that I've played around with and had fun with, or I believe could be substituted out for if you want to go a different way with the deck. So first off, we've got the ST02 Trafalgar Law. So this allows you to on-play restand one of your 5 cost or less Supernova characters. So this is quite nice if we want to get multiple swings through with like a Bonnie or a Law, but for the most part it's quite limited because of that 5 cost or less. So I haven't really run it, but I have had occasional wins with it. Next we've got the new Sec Bonnie. So this is quite nice as it leans more into that constant card drawing. You could potentially swap this out for those 2 5-cost Bonnies we already have in the deck for the resting, but then you'd be seeing less resting consistency. So give or take how you like. Jozu has been a great card. I only just recently at the very end took it out for a bit more consistency with the Supernovas, and wanting to see that 5-cost blocker lore a bit more, because I found I wanted to bounce my own cards a bit more rather than my opponents, and wanting to play something at the same time, so I kind of just felt that I needed to lean into there instead. As mentioned earlier, Hody Jones is a nice replacement for Luffy. The main reason I chose against it is it's hard taking an extra life as Rosinate, especially because you're typically going to be taking 1 or 2 with a block while protecting your characters. So it's hard taking that extra life with the play, and it doesn't obviously play into the bouncing effect. Radio Knife is a nice little event card that kind of works as a searchable early board clear where you can rest something and KO something, resting a 6 cost or less and KOing a 5 cost or less. This is quite nice, especially into like a Rayleigh or anything. So I had some fun with that, but admittedly just the consistency, I'd rather be playing more characters. We've got the 0 cost event. This is especially useful if you lean a bit more into a larger late game deck. I don't run too many late game cards comparatively to like a Bonnie or something, so if you did want to lean more into that late game, the 0 cost event could help cover some of that early counter you'll be missing. We've got the Secret Zoro up next. So Secret Zoro obviously can win your game with the 3 attacks and being a ridiculous power. But I've found that most of the time in this current format, it's a bit too slow. You need to basically be getting your effects and your bonuses on your turn, not playing something and waiting for the following turn. So because of that, I've kind of steered away from Zoro, even though potentially against like a yellow deck, it could be quite useful trying to get those early win, that last win, those last lives, sorry. We've got Doflamingo as a nice 10 cost. This has obviously been really popular in a lot of green decks, especially with Zoro in the meta at the moment, as it allows you to rest the Zoro leader so they can't swing. I've gone away from it purely because of the fact that we have our blocker ability in our leader. We can actually deal with a lot of Zoro's early threats, apart from the fact that if they use that restand event, that quite rolls us over a little bit. But this Doflamingo could be replaced for Lore Beppo. You would be missing a little bit more on your Kid Killer, but we're running enough where it doesn't really matter, but you just don't get that turning into a 7k leader afterwards. And finally, there's the 9 cost Shanks. The KO ability honestly is really strong, especially because we don't really have any high-end removal in this deck. We're ideally just keeping things frozen and just blocking for when they have to swing at our kid. Finally, to wrap things up, here's just a game against me playing against a blue-yellow Nami. I've highlighted this game because it shows a lot of the different combos you can do, especially around lore, so I just think you'd enjoy. I've timed it up so it's only 1.25 speed, so you should be able to get through pretty quickly. So that's it for the video. Thank you so much. I hope you guys can test out this Rosinate deck. And if you've got any other ideas on how to build it or cards that you've run in this type of deck, just chuck them down in the comments below and I'd love to see. Otherwise, catch you later.